And now it's recording. Okay, folks. So welcome this afternoon, evening. I don't know what you call 5 o'clock. And welcome to this nice TESOL webinar, Doctoral Studies During and After the Pandemic, although who knows when after will actually be. We are going to do this in a pretty, informal Zoom panel style. I'm going to introduce myself, and then the panelists will introduce themselves, talk a little bit about where they are in their research and in their doctoral studies, whether they've just finished, as some of them have, or whether they're about to finish, whatever, what they have researched or what they are writing or wrote their dissertations on. And then we're going to ask a few questions about how the current situation has affected their studies and their research. And a couple of different things about scholarship in crisis times. So I guess I'll start by introducing myself. Oh, one more thing that I should point out. For anyone who is not a member, we do want to point out it's a good idea if you are in the English language teaching field to join NICE TESOL. It is both cheaper and I find better than the National TESOL organization because it's more relevant to what we all do. So check that out on the NICE TESOL website. It's only $20.20. Yes, literally $20.20 to join. Yeah, I guess that's it on that front. All right, so me. My name is Justin Pierce Baldwin Gerald. I go by JPB Gerald in my academic work. I am about halfway through my doctoral studies at CUNY Hunter College. I focus my research on race, whiteness, and language teaching. A recent article I wrote about that subject seems to have been spread around recently. I just said recently twice. So that's pretty interesting. And yeah, but I'm only halfway through, so I'm here to learn from these panelists as well. And I guess I'll just kick it off to the panelists. So I'll start with Amanda. Amanda, why don't you introduce yourself and the work that you have done?
Sure. Hi, I'm Amanda Moody-Mastronzi, and I am part of the Contemporary Learning and Interdisciplinary Research Program at Fordham University. And I have recently passed my oral defense, but I am currently under format review. My dissertation is called You Do for Your Kids, and it's a self-study of responsible mentoring. So basically, I worked with 3 alternatively certified teachers who teach different content areas to help them work on culturally responsive teaching in their pedagogy. And in doing that research, I realized how much about myself I haven't really explored and how much I need to do in terms of self-work in order to grow as a mentor and as a teacher educator. And so I'm interested in self-study in teacher education, which is studying my professional actions to learn and improve, and engaging in that self-work, such as thinking about my white privilege and thinking about different aspects of my identity that contribute to who I am as a teacher, educator, and mentor, and just trying to do better with more self-awareness and more awareness about how, I guess, what I do in the world impacts others, and getting to know the teachers that I work with on a more personal level.
Thanks, Amanda. All right, how about, I guess the order doesn't matter that much, but how about Sarah? Let's do Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Sklzacek, and I'm also at Fordham in the Claire program. I was with Amanda, but she has now abandoned me because she's no, okay, it's wonderful. Everyone is passing me up. That's the way it should be. My dissertation topic is, I have to read it because it's long, the title: What happens when teachers create contact opportunities and individuate to reduce their implicit bias? So I was able to start my study a couple months ago, and then it got put on pause because of COVID-19. So what I'm hoping to do, what I hope to continue to do in the fall is work with a group of teachers. I have a school who work with a group of teachers and talk about their implicit biases, and then teach them 2 strategies that are known to try to combat these biases. And then they go out, they do it, they come back and talk about it. So we do this about 7 times and have conversation about it, and we take then I have them take the IAT at the beginning and the IAT at the end, and then some other measures to see if there really is any difference in this short period of time. I did it as my pilot project also, and it was very interesting. And hopefully it's my little way for me to help move this conversation forward in what's going on right now. So, me.
All right, thank you, Sarah. We'll move on to Manuel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Manuel Simons, and I am I think the term is PhD graduand at Fordham University in the CLARE program, Contemporary Learning and Interdisciplinary Research. And I have recently just passed my oral defense, and I've passed my format review, and so I'm about to deposit my dissertation, and then I'm done. So my dissertation is titled "In Search of Critical Theater Pedagogy, Teaching Artists Practice with Students of Color." And the focus of my work is on equity and inclusion in arts education and how drama educators respond to issues of race and racism in the classroom. So in the process of examining that topic, examining my own positionality as a white theater educator has been very important, and examining the structures of privilege and power that shape everything that we think we know about ourselves, which is a process that I've been engaged in for a long time and will continue to be engaged in for a long time. And I also want to acknowledge that as we sit here today and engage in this panel, that we stand or sit and engage on land that has been stolen from Indigenous Americans, and we sit here in the wake of witnessing lynchings of Black people that have continued, and a long history of those, and of course have been recently deeply impacted by the horrific killings, the horrific murders by police of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and so many others, and then that we do all of this in the midst of a global pandemic. So I know we're going to talk more about all of that in relation to doctoral studies and the challenges within, and I'm very glad to be among the participants and very glad to be among the panelists here today.
Thank you, Manuel. Let's go to Carolyn.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Corbin, and I am also in the Fordham University CLARE program. And I feel like pseudo done, but I am awaiting feedback from one committee member. So I was hoping to defend this spring for summer graduation, but with everything going on with COVID and such, my deadline is it came and went, and I'm just still sort of trying to patiently wait. But I'm hoping to defend this summer, and then I'll do format review in the fall. So I'm at the best stage I can be in right now. And my study is on exploring the impact of perceptions of faculty support and bias on students with learning disabilities. And so I essentially conducted a qualitative study with 10 college and graduate students who had learning disabilities. Some students identified other coexisting disabilities as well, and what their experiences were with both positive, supportive faculty and also unsupportive faculty, because I wanted to make sure that I didn't get the kind of Yelp feedback. I wanted students that really could take a look and say, okay, this was really helpful to me and this wasn't. And so we could compare and contrast experiences. And so it was really, really eye-opening for me as somebody. I work in disability support services with students with all sorts of disabilities, and I've been doing that for about 10 years now.
All right, thank you. Oh, the phone is buzzing. And last but not least, Christy Bell.
Hi, everyone. A pleasure to be on the call. Thank you for having me. I am also a doctoral candidate in the CLARE program. As some heard at the beginning, I successfully defended my dissertation on the 5th, and I'm working on my document to submit for format review. And similar to Carolyn, and you'll hear my guys in the back, we'll be submitting for format review in the fall with a January graduation. And so my topic is on negotiating racial and ethnic microaggressions as URM students in STEM. And so my research interests are really aligned with my professional experience. And so I served as a program coordinator and assistant director for a state-funded program for minority students in STEM, and most recently transitioned to a dean's position at the college. And so I was interested in studying what I had been seeing that wasn't documented in the literature. And I think the best question that I got on my defense day was I surprised by anything? And I said, I wasn't surprised. And what I was validated. And that was like such a powerful feeling, especially when you are positioned and gifted somebody's story. And for me, doing a qualitative study in constructivist grounded theory, my invitation was to the students if they would allow me to tell their stories. And the ways that their stories were told were from a place of trust. And so, I honor that gift because I recognize that not every researcher and not every community has someone to be able to do that. And so for me, that was really transformative. And so there's, I think as we kind of talked about, but being in COVID-19, being in the midst of what I think is what we know to be, right, this intense racial climate, and where Black people, their lives are at stake every single day, to be positioned, I think, at this moment in time to tell the stories of our people, for me is really, really unique and really special. And so I think it sort of all is timely in that sense. So I think that's it.
All right, we got some extra people on the call there. So the first question I'm going to ask, and when I ask these questions, don't feel like you have to go in an order. You don't all have to say something. You don't have something to say. So just jump in if you feel like you have something among the panel, obviously. And by the way, folks, we will get to, once we get through the questions, we will have time for people to jump in with questions towards the end. So the first question I'm going to ask is, I had it right here. Right. It is, so fairly simply, some of you mentioned this already, but how has the pandemic and, when we wrote these questions, these things hadn't happened, but the other recent events, really stressful, racism discussions that have happened recently changed or impacted your doctoral work, both in terms of your goals or in terms of the research you're doing. We heard a little bit about what's happened to Sarah's research, so or the way you've been pursuing them. So I just said that in as long a way as possible, so let me say it more succinctly. How has the pandemic and the current racial climate changed or impacted your doctoral work, either in terms of your goals or the way you've been pursuing them? Anyone who wants to jump in first, feel free. That is also what Amanda typed into the box in case people didn't hear.
I think for me, there's been so much going on. It's kind of helped me to reevaluate where I'm at and what is going on. So certainly I had hoped to be a little further along, but at the end of the day, whether I graduated in August or I graduated in January, in the grand scheme of things, didn't really matter. And I had found out that my committee member had lost a family member from COVID. So I don't even really want to reach out to say, like, have you read my research yet? I think I want to show him some humanity right now, is that I'll get there when I get there and he'll get there when he gets there. And I think there's bigger issues right now. But it has made me think too in terms of like next steps for research. So some of the a big theme that came out of my research was microaggressions that students with disabilities are experiencing. And it's an area that hasn't been looked at a whole lot. And I'm actually interested in what the interplay of microaggressions from a racial background as well as disability might come into play. So it's giving me some ideas too about next steps, because I see, that I really enjoyed the research process. I don't necessarily want to write a dissertation again, but I would like to engage in research again.
Others have comments on the same question. Thank you, Carolyn.
One of the things that I was looking at in my research was racial campus climate. And so I think defending the dissertation in this context, even though COVID is not present, what we do know is that communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And that to layer to that, experience after experience after experience where students realize that their like beings are not safe. Right. And so I think the messaging, even though what I was looking at is like subtle messages that students receive, like the reality is that that's compounded by like the pure like hatred, right? Like, and so that when I'm looking at students who are underrepresented in a STEM field, it's like we want them to be preoccupied with their STEM identity and persistence in STEM. And the reality is that our students are not even sure if they're safe, right? Like, are they safe on college campuses? Like when they arrive, what are the messages that they receive from our faculty and from their peers? And do they feel welcome? Do they feel that they belong? And also trying to understand, right? Like, what is it that we could do better? And so for me, it's been sitting in, administrative conversations now, bringing my research into kind of that platform and saying like, hey, like, do we realize that our students are being disproportionately impacted, and like there's more that we could be doing? And so I think this just makes it really relevant. And so in that way, I think that the opportunity over the next few months will be to continue to push this information forward and bring it to the forefront, because it's needed now more than ever.
Yeah, I want to kind of go with what you were saying, Christy Bell, is that like when I went into my school that I'm working in, I went in and kind of did a presentation to see if I could get volunteers to be part of my study. And I think I started out with maybe 2 or 3. And now just thinking about it, I'm wondering, like, what is it going to be like when I go back in the fall? Are people going to understand now that this is more relevant, that this is real, this is true? I'm not just some person coming in, because I felt like that a lot in the past, that I come in and I say these things and I talk about these things and people just sort of look at me and they brush me off and, well, that's not really happening, or that's not real. And so just really thinking about what is it going to look like after this. Are people going to be more willing to have these conversations and really talk about that and look at themselves, like you were talking about earlier, Amanda? Just like we as teachers, part of the process is really looking at ourselves first, right? Really understanding our own biases that we have. And if you don't do that, then it's really hard. How do you go to that next step and really think about how you're going to teach students of color, or even teach white students about the real history of this country? So I don't know, it's going to be interesting going forward to see what really happens after everything is sort of, all the dust is settled, as you'd say.
You're muted.
I have thought quite a bit about this question as well. Can everyone hear me? I'm sorry. And for me, the pandemic has made me think about what responsible teacher supervision and mentoring looks like remotely. So this spring, I continued to supervise a couple of TESOL teachers remotely. And I, like a lot of us who are doing adjuncting work, we needed to find a way to do that remotely, while I was also completing some teacher education courses remotely as well. And all I could think was how ineffective I was this time around. And so I think about, what do I need to do to educate myself and become better at remote teacher supervision and mentoring and teacher education. And I think about how doing it remotely is undoubtedly easier for some people than others, people who have access to all of the resources that they need and the technology and have space in their home to do it and all of that stuff. So it's just making me think about my research in a different way. I never thought about doing it remotely, and now it's a reality. It's a reality that we are shoved into. And of course it needs to be part of my future research.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to bounce off of something Amanda's talking about, which is responsibility in teaching and responsibility, and also responsibility in research. And I think that that's something that I hear sprinkled through everybody's responses in one way or another, where in that, for example, like in my own research, I was doing a qualitative case study with involving a lot of interview, involving a lot of classroom observation. Most of my, like nearly all of my data collection happened prior to COVID-19. And of course, prior to this recent, the recent racial killings that we're hearing about. So, but even when I went in to the classroom and examined my research questions about how theater teaching artists respond to the lives and the perspectives and the experiences and cultures that students of color bring into the classroom, and how they use drama to respond to issues of race and racism, there was so much to think about in terms of, well, first of all, all of the students that participated in my research were Black and Brown students. And then both of the teaching artists whose work I was observing were Black and Brown people. So much of what they talked about what had to do with the current presidential administration, the racist policies enacted by the administration. So much of what they talked about and what the students talked about through the arts and through drama was about racist murders by police officers. Because in the classrooms that the teaching artists were working in, when they were really attending to students' lives, to the lives and the experiences and the concerns of students of color, those were the issues that were coming up. And so I was interested in how did the teaching artists use drama to respond, and in what ways were they innovatively responding. But I think that one of the things that they were doing, a lot of their work was deeply tied in with social and emotional learning, and they were really they were addressing trauma. And so what I think was that as an outsider coming into that environment, and also as a white person coming into the environment, it meant that I had to really examine myself, and it meant that I had to really work from an emancipatory framework and do all the things that are involved in that, in terms of understanding my own privilege, understanding the way that I've internalized racism, but also being sensitive to the trauma that the participants have experienced. And I feel like that was already the case. So now with what's happened, it's like, I think it's asking all of us to double down on how we take responsibility, and how do we do research in a responsible way, and how do we address teaching in a responsible way, because these traumas and these issues were already there, and now there's just like a whole new wave of trauma. So it's like, for me, what it's said is that you have to, that how do I double down on this, and how do I even intensify these efforts?
Well, thanks a lot, Manuel. I think I'm going to jump to one of the different questions here because it sort of seems to connect to what everyone was just saying. So this is one of the ones that you already have. It's not a surprise. What should schools do better, or do to better support students and teachers in times of crisis? And when I say schools, I'm talking not just about the K-12 schools, that especially that Manuel was just talking about, how a lot of these students are going to be coming in having suffered immense trauma, but also the schools that we are at, where people are needing to do research, and research being very important now, although one can debate that, which is the next question. So what can schools do to better support students and teachers in times of crisis, thinking broadly about what the word school means in that case? Anyone can jump in.
One of the things that I've been kind of using as my language and framework is that we've experienced collective trauma, so we need to experience collective healing. And I think that it's shifting the individualistic culture of the way that we do education, right, where the responsibility is like on the individual, rather than the responsibility is on the community, to help to bring us back together, because the reality is that things that have been visible, maybe to some, and others could maybe ignore, can no longer be ignored. And so in that moment, we have to engage in some real work. And I think it is going to challenge us to create spaces for students of color and people of color to be able to do the work that they need to do to heal. But it's also going to call white people into a space for them to challenge their notions and their ideas and their beliefs. And that I think that is not, COVID-19 is not isolated, right? COVID-19 has just shown us that, like, if you're in these 3 zip codes in the Bronx, like, you have been disproportionately impacted, right? So true story, I sat on a meeting and I said, I said this out loud. I was like, every week since COVID started, I knew someone impacted by COVID. Like, someone in our family lost somebody to COVID. My best friend lost her father-in-law to COVID, right? Like, so our communities as people of color, while other people got to go to Rhode Island and got to go to Connecticut and got to enjoy, I don't know if y'all saw that in the Times, but it was like, look at all the zip codes that people left from and where they went. They went to Texas and they went here and they went, like, people in the Bronx didn't have that luxury. People in certain zip codes and even in Lower Westchester, like my parents live in Yonkers, right? Like, certain communities did not have that luxury. And so they were essential. And even what we call essential, right? Like we were saying, when our bodega owners, right? Like, those are the parents of the students that we serve, right? Who are we working on behalf of, and who are we recognizing? But also recognizing that students with privileges have also been impacted. People's 401k took a huge hit. We have students that can't come back to institutions that they have to pay at, right? Like, so there's just a lot that we have to wrestle with, because it's not just one community that's being impacted, but because there's been collective trauma, right? We have to really be diligent and work together to bring back a society that's now broken. And so I think it's, anything we thought we knew, I don't think we know now. Like, we just don't, because I don't think we've ever worked in that way, right? To bring together a community, and to recognize that some people have to step back, right? Like, people need to step out and other people need to be able to step in. And some people are gonna have to give up power, right? And even in our institutions, right? Like, so if all the decision-making is always at the top and the students' voices and the parent voices are never heard, if the students from marginalized communities, if our LGBTQ teens are not, right? Like, for us, it was something like the students who were LGBTQ were telling us, I can't go home because I just came out and home is not safe for me anymore. We weren't ready for that as an institution, right? Like, we were not ready for students who were going to go home and not have access to a quiet space to think, to study, to take on their counseling appointments, nothing. We just were not ready for that as an institution. So we're being called to the carpet, right? To say, like, what do you do, right? When everything, all the services have to be moved remote, but for some people there's no accessibility, right? So what does it mean to be, inclusive? What does it mean to be equitable, right? Like, we use that very freely in our society, right? Like, oh, we're so inclusive and we're so equitable, but only if some people benefit, right? But now we're being asked, like, is everybody benefiting? And we start realizing that they're not. So
Others want to chime in there?
I was going to say, I think a lot of times, I work in higher education as well, and I think a lot of times when we want to think about, okay, there's been a major event or trauma, as Christy Bell said, and we want to talk about it with our students, we do these town halls. We'll say, okay, everybody come to this wing of this building and let's talk about it and hear students. And that model doesn't work right now. And so I know where I work at Seton Hall. We've tried to do some different programming even with students and doing it via, we use Microsoft Teams, but Zoom works the same way. And it's been really interesting to at least experiment with some other ways to try to be there for students at this time, because like Christy Bell said, we haven't been through this before, so we haven't supported students in this way. And I think on a positive side, I think it's challenging us all to think more creatively about how to support students, because we have no choice. But these things might happen in the future, and at least we'll be better prepared, hopefully, down the road with having had these experiences.
Amanda, Sarah.
I think that part of it, and this is being said, is that a big issue is student voice right now. And we've taught, it's like the same thing. We've talked about students, it's like inclusion. We've talked about, like Christy said about it, we talk about inclusion, it's a very nice word. We talk about student voice, it's a lovely word. There's lots of research on student voice, and people say they value student voice, but whose voices have been valued, really, and how? So now there's it's one of those huge cultural shift moments that needs to happen. And I think that institutions, both K through 12 institutions and the institution where I'm an adjunct instructor at, Brooklyn College, in the theater department, like there's a huge and good shakeup happening there right now, because students, the Black and brown students, have found a powerful voice, and they are demanding that their voices be heard about how they learn, what they learn, and why they learn. And really what they're also saying is they're talking about a communitarian paradigm, a different way. They're talking about decolonizing the way that we do education, that can't be from the top up. It's got to be, can't be from the top down. It's got to be from the bottom up. And that means the students have to be part of every decision, because it's their education. And so I think that it's about people knowing when to step aside and let other voices be heard, and people actively being part of the solution in terms of helping to create structures that allow other voices to be heard.
To piggyback off of Manuel, I also think about whose voices are we hearing, and whether our students are being heard. In terms of me supporting grad students, all the TESOL teachers that I've taught and worked with as a supervisor, this semester I struggled a little bit to figure out what to do in terms of an alternative assignment. And I thought, okay, well, I could come up with a bunch of assignments that they could choose from, but ultimately what I realized was I need to ask my students what would work for them. I need to go directly to my students and ask, where are you at right now in terms of your teaching and learning journey? What are things like for you? What would be a meaningful use of your time in terms of doing this sort of makeup assignment for this grad class? How can I help you sort of process the way your life has been turned upside down by this abrupt switch to remote teaching and learning? And the answer for me was just seeking out their voices, seeking where they're at, what makes sense to them in terms of what they would like to do for an assignment, and also in terms of how they would like to be supported. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but I think it's where we need to start. The start should not be just the graduate schools of education or the different programs getting a bunch of professors together and making the decisions for students. No, it should be students making those decisions with their professors and with the programs.
I'm just going to jump in here. I think it's one of the things that I was focused on even before this year is, race and language teaching, because that's my background. And I've been thinking, like, I don't want to tell the same story, in my research and my writing. And then as I started to circle around this before all this stuff happened. But one thing, which is kind of answer to both of these questions, that I've really done is I've really sort of laser focused in on, I think a lot of the time we spent so much time with a deficit perspective trying to figure out what's wrong with all of the Black and brown students, right? And although I work with adults myself, and we don't spend that much time talking about, the issues coming from the teachers and the administration. So that's why I turned my studies around on, like, white teachers. And, I think that one of the things that's different about this, because there have been these sort of events before, which is part of the problem, right? If this was the first time, then I don't think any of this would have happened. But each time it comes up and it goes back down. But whatever reason, probably because a lot of people were in their homes for 4 months, some people seem to be understanding that there really is a systemic problem, which, all of us here may know, but a lot of people didn't actually, like, they just weren't paying attention to that. And so the system is not just this broad thing, it's made up of people. So it's like really understanding who is making those top-down choices and looking at them. So it's where it's changed my research to really focus back on the people making those decisions and problematizing those decisions, and looking for people who are in those powerful roles who are actually doing things right. So that's part of how these things have changed. And we've sort of touched on this question. I'm going to segue to the other one because I know we're going to run out of time. But what is the importance of scholarship in times of crisis? These are particular times of crises, but these are not the first and they won't be the last. So what is the importance of scholarship, or why is scholarship important, which is what I wrote myself, so I should say what I wrote, in times of crisis? Anyone who wants to jump in, and then after this, we'll go to the folks who might have questions outside of the panel. I'm going to call on you if no one says anything.
Hi, my name is Jocelyn. I'm a doctoral student, and I'm writing my paper on how to engage students more. And I did some preliminary work by asking students to write in a journal every week about how they engage in the language. And then that kind of created some sort of dialogue between me and every single individual student. And it kind of helped them engage in learning English, taking interest in English. Since like the COVID started, I realized that might be an important way to create a community also. But as far as like in times of crisis, the scholarship, I think we're realizing that a sense of community is very, very important. And that we have to teach our students and our staff to recognize what our limitations are and like how to move forward. A lot of senior teachers, they don't know how to use technology, and they're making all these blanket rules. And like and so I think we have to kind of be humble enough to come forward and say, like,
what is needed and what is not needed. So we have to do some preliminary work on that, I think. If that makes any sense. I don't know.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Jocelyn. And one of the ways in which that resonates to me is that, like, scholarship is super important, it's crucial, but it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't reach people. So how it's absolutely, the scholarship is critical, but how do we, as emerging scholars, as emerging researchers, find our courage and our voice to say to some of the powers that be, hey, I'm conducting this, I just conducted this study, or, you know, in my literature, what I found was this, and, you know, technology actually does, you know, this, and this, and, you know, and the arts do this, and this, and being brave and being bold and communicating. How do you communicate scholarship? I think that we can see from the current time that there was critical information that scholarship, you know, that if scholars hadn't paid attention to the ways in which COVID-19 was disproportionately impacting communities of color, then, and that was not disseminated and that was not known by the mass public, then I think that, because I think that would have contributed to a less efficacious protest movement. I think the fact that that scholarship and that those impacts became so widely known were a huge part of, a huge contributor to all these other things that happened that created like a tipping point. And I think what I also think of is I you know, I wrote some notes when I thought about these questions in advance, and I read a lot about this, the research blog that was developed by this academic, Dr. Erin Bromage, who's an associate professor of biology at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And he teaches and researches about infectious diseases there. And he has this blog where he doesn't even conduct a lot of the studies himself, but what he does is he translates studies into very digestible, accurate information. And his blog has gone viral, and it was a huge help to a lot of people during the COVID-19 crisis about understanding how the virus works and what is safe and what is not safe. And again, that was not only about scholarship, but it was about how do you communicate scholarship, which, you know, and I see a connection between that and us finding our own voices to talk to the power structure about changes.
Thanks, Manuel and Jocelyn, for your commentary. Any of the, Amanda, Carolyn, before we just sort of have everyone jump in? Yeah, Carolyn, looks like you're
I was going to say, to piggyback off that, I think it is so important to think about how you're communicating, especially in research. So, and piggybacking off of something that Christy Bell said, and Amanda kind of talked about the transformative nature of the research. I have that as a theme in my research too. It was something I didn't anticipate, but how much it changed me and how it gives me opportunities to talk with my my supervisor and different people on my campus about what students with disabilities are experiencing, so that people can think more broadly about it and how their language may impact students, you know, even without their knowledge. So where that microaggression comes out. But part of my dissertation is that I created a website, and it's almost done, but I created a website so that I could have a tangible product that I could get out to more people, faculty, students, and people that do my job as DSS supporters, because it's great to write a dissertation and have it published on the Fordham website, but it's not going to be consumed in the same way that maybe a website might be. So trying to sometimes think too, is there a way that your research can be put out in an alternate format so that more people can learn from it as well, I think is really important in these times.
I 100% agree that the way that scholarship is disseminated is incredibly important. I'm not going to say that my dissertation is, I don't know, newfangled or anything like that, but I thought about how to transform my results into something that people might be able to resonate with, whoever wants to read it. And I didn't want to do a traditional like narrative description of my mentoring experiences with the teacher participants. And what I ended up doing was transforming my experiences with teachers into short stories. And so my goal is eventually to publish those short stories somehow. You know, I don't know where they're going to go or who's going to read them, but I thought that at the very least, I could try to transform, you know, what occurred into something readable that people could read and relate to and possibly enjoy, something that a broader audience could read and relate to, that's something that's not bogged down by academic jargon. And I don't know, I've just read so much about teacher mentoring and supervision that is kind of formulaic, where it's just about like, okay, these are the different moves you can follow that you should try, and these are the best practices. And I just wanted to know what that actually looks like. So I think it comes down to figuring out how do you transform your results into something that other people could read and relate to, and thinking about how you want to publish them. Like with Carolyn's example, making a website, or I don't know, publishing a book of short stories or whatever it is.
It just, I'll let bring the other panelists in here. One of the things that I noticed is that, you know, I gave a presentation at New York TESOL last year, and which is how I met Amanda. And I think, you know, it was well attended. There were maybe 30 people in the room, which is well attended for a conference. And then I recorded it and put it on my podcast, and it was more than 10 times as many people heard it. So, like, you know, thinking about different, you know, media is, and not media like traditional media, but like, you know, ways of getting things out is really important, because like even the journals, like what, you're going to pass it amongst your scholar friends and you're, oh, good job. But like no one outside of the journal is really going to read it, unless, I mean, yeah, I'll send it to my parents, but like someone on the street isn't going to read that. So it's really important that we think deeply about how we're getting things out there, how we write or speak or whatever, such that someone who it would be relevant for but would never think to pick it up might actually find it interesting. Because I think that public scholarship and what that actually means is really important, especially in times like these, or as I say, uncertain times.
One of the things that came up for me is like the idea of like scholarship and who constructs scholarship, and right, and asking some like really hard questions about that, because I think it's so elitist. Like, you know, even the like PhD, like my real reason for getting a PhD is just because I figured that like white people in higher ed wouldn't care what I had to say if I didn't have one. Like, true story. But you know, how are we getting scholarship, and what are we classifying as scholarship? Because right now I think our young people are constructing scholarship every single day. And how do we maybe encourage them also to like make sure that what they're seeing and doing is like archived. And so a really interesting project that the library at the university is doing is like a digital archive of COVID-19, and it's inviting people to post information from, you know, their social media, pictures, stories, recordings, just a combination of things, because this crisis is challenging us even to think about what is scholarship, right? Like, how do we collect this? And so I share that because I think it's an invitation to all of us to think what our scholarship is, right? Like, is our work everyday scholarship, right? Like, it may not have gone through IRB, but it doesn't make it any less valuable, because what the IRB and everything else is just like barriers to access, barriers. And like, unless you can like hack it, like, can you make it through this many years, right? Like through the system to get there. So for me, I think what is bringing up more than anything is that like scholarship is much broader than what we've defined it and like what we've been conditioned to believe. And like, how do we bring other people into this and make sure that they have a platform? And like, if we can be advocates for that, right? Like, can we be facilitators of that construction of knowledge? Because as we said earlier, right, like this whole thing is being flipped upside down. And so for me, even getting a PhD at this moment in time is almost like, ooh, like there's a lot to rethink right now because this whole paradigm has to shift. And so like this degree, really like, what does it really mean? Unless I'm like breaking down barriers and opening the door and not waiting for people to give me a seat at the table.
Christy Bell, quickly, we had a participant ask the digital archives at Fordham that is being, and is it, can people see it, or what's the situation with it?
Yeah, so they're working on it right. I think they just sent out the information, so the director of the library just put it out. Amanda, I can forward it to you and you can see how it would make sense to share with the rest of the colleagues, but they're asking for, it's like an invitation, an open invitation, and they want to archive. So I think Fordham is really interested. They have a digital humanities consortium that they're a part of, and so they've really been working on how do we collect more of this in digital platforms and whatnot. So it's a really good invitation. So I'll forward it and you all can
Thank
see.
you.
Okay, so we're gonna run out of time. If people have questions from the participants, can you just send them to the hosts and we will ask them out loud and people can discuss. We only have a few minutes, so sorry, we are, you know, academics, we talk a lot, but there's not a whole lot we can do about that. But anyone who has a question, type it into the chat and then we'll discuss in the bit of time we have left. So feel free to type away, folks. I will wait a moment. If others have things to say, they want to say while the questions are coming in, that's also fine. Nobody has any questions. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Did a question just come?
Yes, it did. So Carolyn talked about the transformative nature of research. What specifically transformed for you plural, as a researcher during this crisis? Thank you for the question.
So I'm not sure if you're thinking in terms of my research or in terms of our current crises that are going on. But in doing my research, I certainly thought about how students perceive faculty as supportive or unsupportive would impact them in using their accommodations. What I didn't realize that came out was the experience of talking with their DSS office and how helpful that person may have been or how unhelpful that person may have been, because it's a really vulnerable place to have to go and say, I have a disability and this is something I need. And I knew I had power and privilege in working with students, but in hearing my students' stories, it really hit with me. Things that I have learned over the last couple of years that I'm probably doing a lot better than I was doing when I was a brand new person there. But it also is helping me to transform our department in that way. But then in terms of everything going on with the crisis and crises, it's figuring out ways that I can better support people of color that I'm friends with, that are colleagues with, reaching out and seeing how they are in.
She said her power cord was gonna go, yeah.
Okay, I was just like, I'm waiting. It's like the climax. Another question came in. Do you, next question.
Move on.
Do you have advice, you plural, anyone who wants to answer, advice for partnering with communities and community organizations to transform research into action? I just typed the question into the chat for people who didn't hear. But yeah, do you have any advice for partnering with communities and community organizations to transform research into action? Because sometimes, as much as we want to do it, we can't do it ourselves. So.
I mean, ways that I've seen it take place is like, if like for us at Fordham, there's like a center for community engaged learning and creating opportunities for relationships that already exist within the university, and seeing how we can partner and work alongside community and figure out like how does our work support the community, because I think sometimes what does happen with research in communities that there's a lot of mistrust, right? Because researchers have taken advantage of communities because we think we're experts in the community, and so a lot of community partners feel like we take more from them than we really give, and it creates a lot of work. And so I think really to invite us to think about that, right? Like what do we want to engage with, and how can we do that from a place of like true solidarity and from a place of like recognizing the ways in which like our communities have been historically marginalized through this. So I think, to first make sure that we have the framework for it, and to use maybe relationships that already exist in place at your institutions or with people that there's trust, because communities are more likely, right? Like if you are kind of vouched for as someone who can be a true ally, and that's something that has been coming up a lot now, right? Like you just can't call yourself an ally, right? For like community, like community has to like bless you with that allyship. And so I think that that's really thinking about like where do we already have that already formulated, or what partnerships does the institution maybe have with schools, and how might we work through those to do some really transformative work. And then I think it opens the door to other places and spaces. So that's just a thought and ways that I've seen it work well in the past.
Thank you, Christy Bell. Anyone who hasn't said anything in a bit? Sarah, do you have any thoughts on this, or Manuel?
I would just bounce off of what Christy Bell just said, which is, that's like at Fordham, that Center for Community Engaged Partnership is really crucial. So I think to the person who asked the question, investigate if your institution has a center like that, and if not, maybe you can get in on, be part of bringing one there or developing one there, which would be amazing. And you could use Fordham as an example. I think also what Christy Bell's comment made me think of was that, and I had to think a lot about this as I did my own research, was like, instead of this idea, like there's the language of data collection, and you're going to mine, and you're going to go in, and it's all this language this colonialist language that we've learned that research uses. And it's like you have to flip that around, and it's like, what am I bringing to the community? How am I going to benefit this community? And not just like, oh, what I find from this research is going to then benefit you, but like really, how much time are you willing to spend? That this is not just a grab my data and go kind of thing. And that I really fought, for example, in my IRB, like to have permission to remunerate the students who participated and the teaching artists, because they were both vulnerable communities, and it's like they really should be compensated for their time. But I had to really argue that and provide evidence for why. I had to go through all the hoops that they make you go through with the gatekeepers, and yeah, to keep thinking about what can I bring. And I think also it goes back to the communications about, so share your research with community organizations, share the results, and then be part of what can we do with these results, so that when you think about conducting your study, that it goes beyond just like, I'm in this for the period of my study, but that you're really in this.
I got one final question here. Thank you, Manuel. I don't know if we'll all know the answer to this, but interesting question. Let's say, and as it certainly doesn't seem unlikely, everyone is still remote in the fall. Do we think that this would spur people to long-term choose more online learning, that, you know, places that are pre-designed for online learning? Or will, I'm talking about Ben, eventually after the pandemic's over, will people be more eager to return to in-person work? You know what I'm saying? Like, because if we're still remote in the fall, and it doesn't seem unlikely, well, then people won't have a choice. But when people have a choice and it is still, and is actually safe, do you think people will say, you know, I've been doing this online thing for a while, might as well keep doing it? Or will they be like, whew, I really need to get back in the classroom? What do you all think might happen? And this will just sort of, this is less, yeah.
This is Jocelyn again.
Mm-hmm.
So some of us don't know technology very well, and so they will go back to the classroom 100%. This is just my prediction. The people who do understand technology and love, you know, not commuting, love, you know, their flexible time schedules, they might do like 2 or 3 times a week on ground, and the rest of the time they might choose not to. That's my prediction, but I don't know what the administration will decide, right? So that's like the other piece.
I don't think anyone knows what they're going to decide, but yeah.
I would say I don't anticipate higher ed embracing the sort of work from home remote options if they have a choice. But what I do think is that I've seen both sides of students with disabilities. Some students have really excelled in this, and some of the barriers, the physical barriers to get into class, or students with health conditions and things that they might be able to log in, but actually the whole getting up and getting to class when they're not feeling well, that barrier is reduced. So I think some of those students will consider whether online school or online classes is better for them. And then I think on the flip side, we've had students who have executive functioning difficulties, who are hearing difficulties, visual difficulties. Some of them are really struggling with the online environment and are really eager to get back to campus as soon as they can.
Anybody else want to give a final prediction before we sign off here? I mean, we don't really know, right? But it's true. I think the answer is some people will choose one way. There's my dog. And some people will choose the other way. So before we all sign off for good, I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us, especially to the panelists for sharing their thoughts. I must once again say, if people are, you know, English language teachers are involved, it's a good idea to join Nice TESOL. This will eventually be posted through the Nice TESOL channels, so everyone who is looking their wonderful best, you know, that'll show up. So, and you know, get ready for that. But yeah, I wanted to say thank everyone for joining us on this Friday. I guess it's definitely evening now. And Amanda, if you want to say anything else before we sign off.
Yes, Justin, I just want to thank you for being an amazing host, and all of the panelists. Thank you so much for offering your insights and just your thoughtful answers to all of the questions. And you have all inspired me to think harder about what our lives are going to be like after this pandemic. And I just want to do better. I want to do good, and you're making me want to do good. So thank you.
Oh, I tried to say all right, and now I'm actually muted.